Today I'd like to talk further about employing an integral theoretical approach to the treatment of substance abuse. In the spirit of my recent new website review where I discussed integralrecovery.com, integral, I-N-T-E-G-R-A-L, I just had an opportunity to read a related article. The title of the article is An Integral Approach to Substance Abuse. It was co-authored by a team from the University of San Francisco, University of California at San Francisco's Health and Aging Center. The lead author is Diane Amodia. She's an MD, psychiatrist. This article was published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs in December of 2005, and it's accessible online for free. So if you look up any of what I just gave you, you'll find an online version for free. The authors in this article make an articulate plea for more comprehensive approaches to healing substance abuse. Specifically, they posit the need for a comprehensive biological, psychological, and social perspective. They make the point that even though there's a lot of bantering back and forth of a biopsychosocial approach, that typically that's not what's implemented. You get much more kind of sectarian approaches to treatment. In addition to those, assuming that biological, psychological, and social perspectives are relevant and important to address, they introduce two others, namely the spiritual and cross-cultural perspectives, feeling like that this really fills out the picture in terms of treatment of substance abuse. Their model draws directly from the seminal work done by Ken Wilber, which I referenced earlier, who is the founding kind of father of integral theory. He titled his approach Integral Theory. They're applying it to the treatment of substance abuse. They summarize very helpful, very complex theory. As I mentioned earlier, he's written a few score books on this topic. I recommend any of his books. Ken Wilber, W-I-L-B-E-R. I think that they do something really helpful in providing a single-page diagram of what it looks like to apply integral theory to substance abuse. I recommend you to the article. It helps clarify things visually. What they're doing in that diagram as well as through their article is looking at four complementary perspectives. I'll review those right now for us. I also discussed these in the previous video on integral recovery. Just as we can examine our lives from the interior or experiential perspective, what psychology calls phenomenology, and also examine our lives from the exterior perspective, that would be what psychology looks at in terms of empirical science, so we can understand our experiences from an individual perspective, our own lives and stories, as well as from a collective level, from the vantage point of culture, society, political and economic realities, even group or cultural mythologies and religions. Now, how does all this pertain to treating substance abuse? The authors, rightly I believe, observe that most treatment programs focus on only one of Wilber's quadrants. I've worked in this field for a number of years, and this has been borne out in my experience. I'll give you a couple of examples. They start by talking about the 12-step programs, and they both, as do I, put a great deal of positive store in what's going on in the 12-step programs in the last century. A great deal of value, especially in integrating spirituality into the process of recovery. In Wilber's model, and as you look at the diagram in their article, this would be what he calls the lower left-hand quadrant, which looks at the interior perspective from a collective angle. This would be the zone of spirituality and belief systems. But the authors also say there's an accompanying disregard or even negative judgment of psychological exploration, especially looking at the psychodynamics of somebody, for example, somebody who's recovering from addiction, looking at the impact of their personal story. There tends to be an underplaying and sometimes a criticism of looking at one's life from that particular quadrant. In Wilber's model, this would be the upper left-hand quadrant, which would be the interior individual perspective. That's one example of what can be missed by operating kind of as a one-trick pony. They also address what can happen in the 12-step programs in terms of their questioning, challenging, looking at the biochemistry of the addict in recovery. This would be a perspective that's dealt with by informed medical professionals, and there tends to be a fair bit of controversy in the 12-step programs. For example, if one is on psychotropic medications, that is looked at askance. This particular quadrant would be Wilber's upper right-hand quadrant, namely the external or empirical perspective from an individual level of analysis. and so on it goes with the quadrant level. Hope that makes a little bit of sense. That's a starter. They also move to another claim that I think is valuable to look at. Not only are they looking at integrating multiple perspectives simultaneously in individualized treatment, but they also make a very strong argument for addressing political and economic realities, variables which underpin individual treatment. And in particular, what they pick up to critique is our kind of knee-jerk policy here in the United States for incarcerating the addict, while at the same time ignoring the political, social, and economic context of the addict. And they detail a fair bit of information to suggest that incarcerating the addict, it may make sense at some kind of common sense level, but it's proven to be neither effective nor is it particularly humane. And so, as I think of it right now, it would be the lower right-hand quadrant that looks at what's going on in an addiction around the socioeconomic status, for example, or the gender, or the racial. If you do any research at all on statistics around incarceration in the United States, you'll see the disproportionate incarceration of certain ethnic minorities, highly correlated. Also at the same time, the vast majority of people that are incarcerated have been incarcerated either while under the influence or while seeking to be under the influence of substance. And so to ignore the lower right-hand quadrant, which would be looking at socioeconomic, political, other realities such as that, would be to be doing the addict a real disservice and probably doing ourselves a real disservice too in terms of where we pump our money. Until our society adopts, I believe, a more comprehensive or holistic treatment approach along the lines of the integral model that we've been discussing, I believe we can just say no till we're blue in the face.